Welcome to Business Recipe. Every business has a recipe. Here's theirs. Today's recipe: Boeing, March 10th, 2019. Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302. Captain Yared Getachew is 29 years old. He has 8,022 flight hours. 6 minutes after takeoff, a computer system he has never heard of fires. He runs Boeing's emergency checklist. The checklist does not mention the system. The plane goes into the ground at full speed. All 157 people aboard die. This is not a story about an engineering failure. This is the recipe for making 346 deaths a line item and walking away clean. Today's recipe: Boeing, March 10th, 2019. Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302. Captain Yared Getachew is 29 years old. He has 8,022 flight hours. 6 minutes after takeoff, a computer system he has never heard of fires. He runs Boeing's emergency checklist. The checklist does not mention the system. The plane goes into the ground at full speed. All 157 people aboard die. This is not a story about an engineering failure. This is the recipe for making 346 deaths a line item and walking away clean. By the end of this video, here is what you will understand. The ingredients Boeing assembled, including a competitive trap set by Airbus that forced Boeing's hand. The method, including a 2013 internal memo that shows the concealment, was a documented institutional decision, not an accident. The result, a settlement that cost Boeing less per death than a single aircraft engine. And who is eating it right now? Specifically, why Boeing's own paying customer is the only entity forcing them to answer under oath in a federal courtroom as of this week. Every recipe starts with ingredients. Boeing's had 3. Ingredient 1, the McDonnell Douglas acquisition. In 1997, Boeing bought McDonnell Douglas, and McDonnell Douglas's finance executives bought Boeing. The combined company moved its headquarters from Seattle to Chicago in 2001 to physically separate itself from its own engineers. The culture that followed asked a different question than engineers ask. Engineers ask, is it safe? Finance executives ask, what does safe cost? Ingredient 2, Airbus. In 2010, Airbus launched the A320neo, a re-engined version of their existing jet with fuel efficiency gains that American carriers wanted. Southwest, United, and American started talking to Airbus. Boeing faced a choice: spend $10 billion building a new narrowbody or re-engine the 737 to match it. They chose the 737. Ingredient 3, the FAA relationship. Since 2005, Boeing employees had been performing significant portions of the FAA's own certification work, a legal arrangement called delegated authority. The company that built the plane was also the company that certified the plane was safe. This was not unusual. It was standard practice across the aviation industry, but it created a structural reality. Every safety determination had a cost calculation attached to it, and the people doing the determining were Boeing employees. Now add those 3 ingredients together: a cost-first culture, a competitive threat that required a fast answer, and a regulatory process administered in-house. The result was MCAS, the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System. The re-engined 737's larger, forward-mounted engines created a nose-up tendency at high angles of attack. MCAS was designed to counter it automatically, pulling the nose back down without the pilot's input. MCAS was new. New meant the FAA might require simulator training. Simulator training meant up to $1 million per plane for Boeing's airline customers, a cost Boeing had contractually agreed to reimburse Southwest Airlines if it was ever required. Southwest had 280 MAX orders on the books. Boeing's potential liability: $280 million just from one airline if the FAA looked too closely at MCAS. The ingredients were in place. Now for the method, and it starts with a memo. The method was simple. Strip the ingredient from the label. In 2013, Boeing held an internal meeting to work through the certification strategy for MCAS. The conclusion, documented in a written memo, reads like this: if we emphasize MCAS as a new function, there may be a greater certification and training impact. Read that again slowly. They did not say MCAS is not new. They said, if we emphasize that it's new, there may be consequences. So the solution was to not emphasize it. The instruction that followed, Always describe MCAS as an extension of the existing speed trim system, not as a new flight critical system with independent authority over the airplane's stabilizer. This was not a single engineer making a bad call. This was a documented institutional strategy to misrepresent a safety-critical system to federal regulators in order to protect a sales contract. In March 2016, Boeing's chief technical pilot Mark Forkner completed the strategy. He persuaded the FAA to omit any description of MCAS from the pilot manuals entirely. His argument to the FAA, MCAS would activate only in situations way outside normal flying conditions. The FAA accepted this. MCAS disappeared from every document a pilot would read. What happened next is where the story gets darker. Boeing's engineers then quietly expanded MCAS's authority. In the original design, MCAS could move the horizontal stabilizer in relatively small increments. In the final design, MCAS could move the stabilizer far more aggressively. And it would base that decision on a single angle of attack sensor, with no cross-check and no redundancy. If that single sensor malfunctioned, MCAS would push the nose down regardless of what the pilots were doing. And it would keep doing it. Forkner says he was never told about this change. The FAA was never told. The airlines were never told. LOT Polish Airlines placed its order for 737 MAX jets in 2016. Lion Air placed its order. Ethiopian Airlines placed its order. The pilot manual, the legal and operational contract between Boeing and every airline, made no mention of MCAS. The plane shipped. Now for what came out of the oven. What came out of the oven was this. October 29, 2018, Lion Air Flight 610, 13 minutes after takeoff from Jakarta. A faulty angle of attack sensor feeds false data to MCAS. MCAS fires. The pilots have never heard of MCAS. The checklist has no entry for it. Captain Bhavya Suneja and First Officer Harvino have more than 11,000 combined flight hours. They cannot diagnose what is overriding their airplane because they were never told it existed. All 189 people aboard die. The world takes note. Boeing issues a bulletin. The bulletin tells pilots, for the first time, Nortau, that MCAS exists and describes how to defeat it. But it does not ground the plane. Boeing and the FAA say the existing procedures are sufficient. March 10, 2019. Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302, Captain Yared Getachew, 29 years old, 122 hours, follows the procedure Boeing issued after Lion Air. MCAS fires again. He runs it correctly. The system overrides him anyway. 6 minutes, all 157 aboard die. The impact was total. Families of Ethiopian Airlines passengers were offered soil from the crash site in lieu of remains. March 13, 2019. The 737 MAX is grounded worldwide. Boeing's stock drops from $440 to below $150 over the following year. $20 billion in market value erased. Orders freeze. LOT Polish Airlines grounds its 26 MAX jets. Lion Air, Ethiopian Airlines, Southwest, American, all grounded globally. Then, the accounting. In January 2021, Boeing signs a deferred prosecution agreement with the Department of Justice. Total value, $2.5 billion. Criminal penalty, $243.6 million, divided by 346 deaths, $704,000 per death. The list price of a single 737 MAX starts at $99 million. Boeing's criminal fine per death was less than the cost of one aircraft engine. No executives were charged. Boeing admitted to deceiving the FAA, and the case was considered closed. Now, before we continue, the strongest case for Boeing. Argument 1. MCAS was designed to activate only in rare aerodynamic edge cases, at angles of attack far outside normal flight. The engineers who built it believed, in good faith, that no commercial pilot would ever encounter it under standard operating conditions. What happened was a catastrophic sensor failure combined with a checklist gap, a tragedy of cascading failures, not deliberate intent to harm. Argument 2. Boeing signed the deferred prosecution agreement. They admitted to deceiving the FAA. They paid $2.5 billion as one of the largest corporate settlements in aviation history. The accountability mechanisms worked. The system produced consequences. Here is why both arguments are incomplete. The The 2013 memo was not written by a rogue engineer who made a bad call in isolation. It was the output of a coordinated institutional meeting where multiple people documented the decision to describe a flight-critical system as something it was not, in order to protect a sales contract. That is not a cascade of failures. That is a decision. An accountability that costs less than the fraud it is punishing is not accountability. It is a business expense. Who ate it? Not Boeing. The 346. Captain Yared Getachew, 29 years old. First Officer Ahmed Nur Mohammed, 25 years old, in his second year of commercial flying. Pius Adesanmi, Nigerian-Canadian professor at Carleton University, traveling home from a conference in Addis Ababa. Captain Bhavier Suneja, Indian national, 6,028 flight hours, on a routine domestic hop from Jakarta. These are 4 of 346 people who ate what Boeing cooked. And then, the executives who ate well. Dennis Muilenburg, Boeing's CEO from 2015 through December 2019. After the first crash, he told the public the 737 MAX was as safe as any airplane that has ever flown the skies. This is the SEC's finding, not an allegation. The SEC charged Boeing and Muilenburg personally for misleading investors. Boeing's penalty, $200 million. Muilenburg's personal penalty, $1 million. His reported exit package when Boeing fired him, $62 million. His personal accountability, the number the SEC put on it, was 1.6% of what Boeing paid him to leave. The only individual the DOJ prosecuted was Mark Forkner, Boeing's chief technical pilot, the man who removed MCAS from the pilot manuals. A Texas jury acquitted him in under 2 hours. The defense argued, credibly, that Forkner was never told about the expansion of MCAS's authority when Boeing's engineers enlarged its scope. He passed incomplete information to the FAA because Boeing had given him incomplete information. The acquittal was the right legal outcome and the wrong institutional outcome simultaneously. Boeing indicted one person, watched him go free, and paid the corporate fine. No executive ever answered for the 2013 memo under criminal oath. The shareholders. Boeing stock fell from $440 in February 2019 to below $150 by March 2020. The SEC charged Boeing and Muilenburg with misleading investors, specifically because while the crashes were happening, both made public statements assuring markets the MAX was safe. The $200 million SEC fine was distributed as a fair fund to investors who bought Boeing stock during the period of those assurances. May 2024. The Department of Justice found Boeing in breach of the Deferred Prosecution Agreement. Specifically, Boeing had not implemented the compliance measures it committed to in 2021. DOJ filed new criminal charges. For the first time since the crashes, Boeing faced the realistic possibility of a criminal conviction at trial. December 2024. A federal judge rejected the plea agreement that Boeing and the DOJ had jointly submitted. The judge's concern, the agreement contained a provision specifying that the independent compliance monitor could not be black, a racial restriction that Boeing and the government had negotiated and agreed to, and that a federal judge found legally indefensible. Boeing was back at square one. May 29, 2025. The Trump administration's DOJ signed a new non-prosecution agreement with Boeing. Boeing admitted to obstructing federal oversight. Boeing paid an additional $114 billion, $487 million new criminal penalty, $445 million or more to the victim fund, $455 million in safety compliance investments. No criminal conviction, no trial. Senators Warren and Blumenthal called it a betrayal of the families. The families called it grief and anger. That was 3 accountability attempts, 3 escapes, and now U.S. District Court, Seattle. May 12, 2026, LOT Polish Airlines. LOT placed its 737 MAX order in 2016. They grounded their 26 jets in 2019. They sued Boeing in 2021, claiming Boeing concealed MCAS when they sold the jets. They are seeking no less than $250 million. And as of this week, they still fly 26 Boeing MAX jets every day. Boeing's defense in the opening argument captured the paradox perfectly. Their attorney accused LOT of crying foul and fraud out of one side of their mouth in the courtroom, while operating the very planes they claim were sold under fraud. Think about that argument. Boeing's best defense is that their customer has no alternative but to keep buying their product. That is not a defense of the aircraft's safety. That is a confession of captivity. 3 signs this recipe will be cooked again. Unless you know what to look for, here are the 3 signs that tell you a company has cooked this recipe. Before the crash. Sign 1. The regulator is also the certifier. When the entity being regulated performs its own safety certification through delegated authority, every safety determination has a business calculation attached to it. At Boeing, FAA delegation meant Boeing employees were certifying Boeing planes. This is not corruption. It's a structural feature of how aviation certification has worked for decades. But when that structure exists, the question to ask is, who bears the cost when safety adds cost? At Boeing in 2013, that question had a documented answer. Sign 2. The penalty is smaller than the fraud's profit. Boeing's original criminal penalty, $243.6 million, was less than the savings from avoiding simulator training across 4,000-plus MAX orders. At approximately $1 million per plane in avoided training costs, Boeing's fraud saved more than it cost. When accountability is cheaper than fraud, the incentive structure does not change. That is not a legal failure. It is the design of the settlement framework. Sign 3. The individual takes the fall. The institution takes the fine. One person was indicted in the Boeing MAX case. Mark Forkner. He was acquitted. 0 executives were convicted. 0 engineers went to prison. Boeing paid. Boeing's institutional culture, the same culture that produced the 2013 memo, produced another crisis in January 2024 when a door plug blew out of a 737 MAX 9 mid-flight on an Alaska Airlines route. No one died that time, but the investigation found the same pattern. Missing bolts, inadequate quality control, a system that prioritized delivery speed over verification. The verdict in the LOT trial has not come yet. If Boeing settles before this video reaches you, and they have made settlement an art form, that settlement will be the 4th chapter of the same story. The recipe survives because the recipe works. Boeing's recipe for surviving accountability already exists. They have run this play before, and the system has paid every time. If this opened a new angle on how regulatory capture actually works, follow Business Recipe. We cover the business stories behind the headlines. Next, another institution that turned its regulator into a business partner, built an empire on it, and then watched the empire crack. Today's recipe, complete. Boeing's recipe, also complete. That is the problem. So, what business should we crack open next? Drop the company name in the comments. We read them. If you want more case studies like this one, subscribe. New recipe every Tuesday.